with that, we hand over the session for the surgical retina 3 session. And, I would like to invite again Dr. Nitin Prabhu Desai, sir, who's co-chairing this session. Dr. Mandar. Mandar is here. Good morning, Mandar. Welcome, Dr. Mandar. Again, a very prolific and experienced retinal surgeon. And Dr. Sachin, the star from Pune. Hello, Sachin. Sachin was one of the most sincere students way back in Shankar Netralaya, and I was doing my fellowship. Who was doing his post graduation, then did his VR fellowship. So I would like to welcome all of them to the chair. And without delay, we'll start the first topic by none other than Dr. Manish Bapai. I call him the forceps man because he has, he has all these tricks up his sleeve and new innovations. And the foreign body forceps which he has developed is an amazing instrument. And I'm going to ask him to speak today on ILM peeling in special situations. Dr. Manish, please go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Preetham, for those kind words. And I'll share my screen. Give me a moment, please. My slides are visible?
Yes, sir.
At the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Ragini Madam, Swapnesh, Sumit, Dr. Preetham, and MOS Scientific Committee for giving me this opportunity. I'll be talking about ILM peeling in special situations. ILM, as we know, is a thin acellular membrane which forms innermost retinal layer, it is formed by footplate of Muller cells. It has important role in the retinal histogenesis, or axonal growth, and navigation to optic disc. Embryological absence of ILM causes dysgenesis of the retinal layers. However, there is no specific function which is there in adult retina. Peeling of the ILM, it is one of the most commonly done procedures nowadays, and it helps in removal of tangential traction in the macular area, regaining the macular anatomy in tractional maculopathies. It appears to be safe when performed in atraumatic fashion and is proved to have better anatomical closure rates in macular hole surgeries. And probably more importantly, the surgical videos look really nice. However, it is so these are the common indications we all know: full thickness macular hole by most commonly done indication for ILM peeling, whether it's idiopathic, traumatic, or tractional. Rhegmatogenous retinal detachment with or without PVR, depending on surgeon's choice. Epiretinal membranes. Diabetic tractional retinal detachments. I will not be covering diabetic tractional retinal detachment and diabetic macular edema because subsequent speaker is going to speak on this. Then vitreomacular traction and macular foveoschisis, optic pit maculopathy, Valsalva, Thurston syndrome. These are some of the indications. It is not without complications. There is retinal trauma which can happen, intraocular dye toxicity, Muller cell dysfunction, paracentral macular hole. There is microperimetric changes which causes microscotomas and reduced sensitivity in area of ILM peeling. Dissociated nerve fiber layer, which are hyperreflective arcuate striae in the optic nerve fiber layer. So these are the complications of ILM peeling. So it is not something which is totally harmless procedure, and we have to be judicious when we decide to do the procedure. Let's look at some of the cases. This is the case of rhegmatogenous retinal detachment. This was a young patient who had retinal detachment. In young patients, when I prefer to peel ILM because it makes sure that we are removing the PVD is properly induced, and we have complete removal of vitreous, as well as the chances of recurrence of chances of ERM formation are reduced. So in this case, I have not used any LPFC to support the retina, and it's done in done in piecemeal fashion. Well, this was a patient who had PVR changes, where again, I have not used any LPFC, and we can quite easily remove the membranes and the ILM as well as the PVR membranes in this case without using the LPFC. We have to be very judicious while using removing the membranes to avoid any macular trauma. We can see we have removed all the PVR membranes along with the ILM in extended fashion, and this patient has done well. Here the ILM is being removed. This is a patient who had PVR changes and very tight macular pucker. I tried to remove the membranes without help of LPFC, but LPFC helps in these situations where we can use it as third hand to keep the retina flattened and then use forceps to remove the ILM and the premacular membranes in these cases. So there are many articles about, there are 170 review articles about different indications of ILM peeling on PubMed. So many more articles which are published, and the chances of ERM formation in rhegmatogenous retinal detachment, if the primary ILM peeling is done in rhegmatogenous RD, it is helpful to reduce subsequent surgeries. The chances of recurrence are less, as well as ERM formation is less. Epiretinal membrane, many surgeons, many of us prefer to do ILM and ERM removal together, like in this case where I'm peeling the ILM, so the ERM on top comes along with it, and we have complete removal. We ensure complete removal. In these cases, the chances of recurrence of ERM are much less if the ILM peeling is done along with it. Whether you peel along with the ERM or separately, we get lesser chances of recurrence of ERM. But what is seen is that even if the ERM recurs, it is not visually significant. So we have to really judge whether we want to remove ILM if the ERM and ILM peeling is done separately. This is another case of optic disc pit, where this was a 12-year-old child where we have done surgery to do the vitrectomy, and then ILM peeling is done. After PVD induction, ILM peeling is done across. Now this is, we have to be very careful in doing this, because if it's peeled across, there is a risk of full thickness macular hole developing, and we have to be very slow. And the video is made fast for saving time, but we have to do it very slow, and if possible go around the macula. In this case, the ILM is stuffed into the optic pit here, and as the time passes, we can see the macula falling back, as well as improvement in visual acuity. Now this patient child is having vision of six part. She came a couple of months back, and she's after a year she's almost having flat macula and vision of 6 part. In cases of idiopathic macular holes, small macular holes, we peel the ILM. I prefer not to do inverted flap technique. I just do simple ILM peeling it from arcade to arcade. Can be done in a piecemeal fashion. It's important to have atraumatic peeling without causing any retinal damage, and do as large as possible when you are not planning to put any flaps back into macular hole. While this is another case of chronic traumatic macular hole, young patient, where the inverted flap technique is done, where the initial small peel is done around the macula and it's not detached from the edge of the hole, and then it's the flap is trimmed with very low suction and high cut rate, and it's left to fill the macular hole, and then the peripheral peeling is done so as to remove any tangential traction around. This is a case of Valsalva retinopathy, large premacular hemorrhage, which is actually sub-ILM hemorrhage. Here, this aspiration scraper is used to remove the blood clots initially, and then after doing staining, the ILM is peeled so as to get the complete removal of the ILM and the blood clots along with it. This is in case of vitreomacular traction, which is quite common. This is where I'm using aspiration scraper to gently induce PVD. So because violent induction of PVD in these cases can cause macular hole by deroofing the macula. So gentle PVD induction is done all around the vitreomacular traction, and then vitrectomy is completed, and then the same instrument can be used to create initial flap, ILM flap, which is then which can then be completed with the ILM peeling forceps. Again, there is no flap which is left on the macula. It's complete removal of the ILM in this case. This is another case where this was a patient who had sub-silicon oil membrane formation, and the high myopic eye, the forceps couldn't reach the ILM or ERM removal forceps. So ERM. So here again, the aspiration scraper was used to kind of grab the edge of the ERM and ILM, and I could peel the membrane in toto. We can see when the ILM is coming along with the ERM in this case. So once it is removed from all around, at the end of forceps is used. So to conclude, it's a relatively safe procedure in experienced hand for various indications. We have favorable anatomical results in majority of the patients. However, decision to peel should depend on individual case, depending on anatomical and visual benefits, and intra-op and post-op complications have to be kept in mind. It's not necessary to remove ILM in each and every case. However, where it is required, it can be done. It should be done in safe manner. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Manish, for the excellent talk. Any questions for Dr. Manish? Okay, one small question, Manish. For the resurgery of the macular hole, the primary surgery has caused a type 2 macular closure.
Yeah.
Do you have an indication for resurgery, and when do you operate, and any specific things you do for the same?
So basically, if it's, I would operate if the whole edges of the hole are raised. If there are cystoid changes which are seen and edges of the holes are raised, then I would probably then I would do resurgery. I have tried putting the ILM graft from other side, but it's difficult to hold it in place. But in these cases, I have found a technique followed by Dr. Manish Nagpal to be very useful. If you just do proper peeling, if your peeling is proper, if you've ensured that, then you can just massage the edges of the macular hole, and then you can get anatomical closure quite well. One thing is that we are leaving, we are doing a lot of inverted flap techniques nowadays, but that is also one of the reasons for non-closure of the hole, because if the flap moves out of the macula and then it keeps pulling on the macular hole, it can reopen. It has happened in one of my case where after going in, I realized it was the flap which was causing the whole non-closure of the hole. So that is something we have to be careful about. I think massaging the macular hole edges works quite well in resurgeries.
Nitin, can I make a comment on this, Nitin?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, Sachin, you can email me. I'll have a presentation where there were about 6 patients of primary surgery done by me of macular hole. And I've just done OPD C3F8, where I have seen on OCT there is no ERM and these holes have got beautifully closed. So if you want, you can share me your email. I'll send you the
Sure.
photographs, just without any operation.
Okay. You're just injecting a gas in the OPD?
Yeah,
In summary? Yeah.
like pneumoretinopexy.
Okay.
And make sure patient maintains position and 3 head closed, I think, without any
Okay.
surgical intervention.
Vatsal, what is the amount of gas you're putting in?
About, I think, 1 cc or 1.25 cc for C3F8 and
Okay.
paracentesis. I
So you don't have pressure problems with them.
I monitor the pressure.
Okay.
Means I call patient daily, and now with Silverstone, probably you can do OCT also daily, and you will know what is happening.
Right.
Is it,
I think that is one good thing we can try in many younger patients.
I think in that situation, you have to do complete OPD-FG in a vitrectomized eye. Otherwise,
Not necessarily, because you have done primary surgery. So I just inject gas, and just do maybe paracentesis or remove fluid from 6 o'clock position.
Okay.
It's a pure gas, no, sir? You're injecting?
Yeah, I use pure gas.
Okay. Sir.
For Manish, I have one question, if time permits. In last 10 years, we are almost peeling the ILM in all macular holes, as well as in ERM's macular pucker cases. Theoretically, there are so many contraindications and so many research papers about the removing the Muller plates by removing the ILM. Have you come across any practical situation where you feel the ILM peeling should not have been done?
So it's not about feeling whether it should not have been done, but I have definitely seen a couple of cases of paracentral retinal holes forming. In these cases, I have a OCT actually because of short of time, I couldn't show it, but there is, you can see in the papillomacular bundle, you can see a small retinal trauma in relatively atraumatic surgery where the patient has closed macular hole and vision has improved, but not to 669. I think it was 618 the patient removed. So I think especially in cases where it is not absolutely necessary, like ERMs, or if there is not a thick macular pucker, if you are operating on 612i or 618i for ERM, I don't think we really need to go behind removing the ILM as well. We can just do a ERM removal in such.
Yeah, correct. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Manish. I think we'll move on to the next talk. The next talk is by Dr. Swapnesh Sawant. I don't think need an introduction. All of us know him, a prolific retina surgeon in Mumbai. Has done an excellent job for MOS and BOA, and he's a too good administrator with a very good skills. He has done his fellowship from SN. Today he'll be talking about epithelial membrane management techniques. Dr. Swapnesh, you can start. You're visible, you're audible.
Okay. So thank you, Scientific Committee of MOS, for accepting this, and very warm welcome to all of you. And just beginning my talk, Dr. Manish has made this presentation quite easy for me. So ERM patients present to us with metamorphopsia, drop in visual acuity. There is a puckering of macula and underlying macular edema. There could be some fibrotic changes in the extracellular matrix at the interface. And also there could be underlying breakdown of the blood-retina barrier. So there is a double mechanism at this, where the damage is caused by the mechanical traction by the PVD, which damages the Muller cell and causes the Muller cell gliosis, and it also involves the inflammatory cytokines and growth factor causing underlying fibrosis. So good prognostic factors in our case selection could be shorter duration of symptoms, lesser central foveal thickness at the baseline is not such a good prognostic factor. Good integrity of ISOS photoreceptors can increase the confidence of the surgeon to prognosticate the patient. So we should evaluate the OCT as well as the macular status and the rest of the retina and the other eye also in these cases before promising any patient. So moving on to the videos, this is one of the simple ERM cases where I have used a brilliant blue dye, and you can see the inverse staining of the ILM around, and there is no staining of the actual ERM area. So using a max grip forceps is what I prefer, and this is a run-of-the-mill surgery where we are peeling from arcade to arcade. Obviously, the basic principles of complete vitrectomy and inducing a proper PVD, checking for the peripheral breaks, hold true in all these cases. And the modern viewing systems have made this surgery quite predictable. And so this is the OCT picture of pre-op and post-op. Going to the next case, you can see that this is a more complicated case where there is a lot of puckering occurred, and almost the arcades are coming closer to each other. And Dr. Lalit Verma sir had shown a very nice presentation and called this actually kissing arcades. And we could extrapolate one of the recent OCT biomarkers as in this case also, where there is a disintegration or a disorientation of the inner retinal layers. And so we should not promise much to the patient in this particular case. So a typical 3-port vitrectomy, and beginning with the vitrectomy around the ports, going on to the anterior and the core vitrectomy. Doing a fluid gas exchange, again using brilliant blue dye. So some of these thick ERMs may have appendages going beyond the arcades, and it's important to identify them. I usually switch to the green ring, the macular lens of the ReSight to make my visualization much better. But it's not a bad idea to start peeling even with the yellow ring, which is a wide angle viewing ring of the ReSight system. Even with the higher magnification, we can get a good view. So also looking at the appendages, because some membranes might be tough to remove, and they might have some tentacles which are extending beyond the arcade. So undue increased traction while pulling all this can cause iatrogenic retinal breaks and bleeds. So thankfully in this particular case, after the initial hiccup, it came out nicely in toto. But in this particular case, I have restained to detect any residual ILM layer which is there, because the orientation of the arcade vessel had really gone haywire. So I thought that in this particular case there was a high chance of recurrence of ERM if any bit of ILM was left behind. So double staining technique definitely is advocated by some of the surgeons, especially where you have a gut feeling that the ERM may recur, and a typical closure with a FG and C3 effect gas injection. This is how the result seen, and you can see the orientation of the arcade vessel going back to better, closer to the normal levels. However, the OCT picture is not so promising, and I would like to discuss at the end of this PPT about what to do about this residual edema and how do all the panelists tackle it. And this is the last case in my presentation where the ERM is much more extensive and extending almost beyond the equator, and causing traction and almost a schisis-like picture. So over here, again, examination of the periphery was very important, and I could see very small holes in the peripheral area. But and I've done endolaser to that particular area before I start the peeling of the ERM and the ILM. So not to miss any micro breaks which are there, because the retina over there, obviously the laser power was very titrated so that the laser itself will not cause any retinal damage. Again, beginning in a correct plane is very, very important in these particular situations. And you can see the appendages, and very well seen in this particular case where the appendage is extending beyond the arcades. So not having a very aggressive pull helps in these cases, and going bit by bit, area by area, like piecemeal, really helps in removing and getting a good removal, showing the underlying retina that there is no pull which is created. Obviously, we can again double stain and see whether there is any bit of ILM left behind, and a closure with C3 effect gas. And this is after, if you had noticed, I had shown this patient in 2016, and now after 2 years, I have achieved a good anatomical success. And in between, the patient had a lot of areas of still anatomically, it was not looking that great, but after a long time then. it improved. So we have two options in these particular cases. Staining of the vitreous is usually advocated with IVTR. It could, in cases of diabetes and RVO related ERMs, it could help in reducing the underlying macular edema. Dexamethasone, I don't have any personal experience, but there are few papers mentioning that. Also, a controversy regarding ILM peeling. It can reduce the retinal sensitivity and significantly increase the incidence of microscotomas, as pointed out by Dr. Bapai sir. And also there is a pilot study which also advocates ERM removal with foveal sparing ILM peeling. But that's too much of an effort to do, because you want to get out of the case with as less further trauma as possible. So at least I have never tried that. If I have to remove the ILM, I just remove it in toto, underlying the ERM. And so yes, these were the few controversies. Question to the panelists is definitely, what are their methods to reduce the post-operative not so good anatomical success we get in certain cases after removing the ERM? Do people, especially in two categories, in idiopathic ERMs, what do they do? Do they re-inject gas and advocate further positioning for the patient? And as Vatsal sir told, that that might help. Or in cases where it is diabetes and RVO related ERMs, do they go ahead and what is their drug of choice to make the edema settle down? Because now we have a vitrectomized eye and the half-life of all these drugs is questionable. Thank you very much for giving a chance.
Great presentation, Swapnesh, as usual. I think when it comes to ERMs and success, one good preoperative evaluation also helps, where you're looking at the ISOS junction, the ellipsoid layer. I think there itself, sometimes you're able to judge the prognosis and foretell, the future, because everything looks good anatomically after the surgery. But then those functional surprises that you get, I'm sure many a times before surgery, you can predict them. Dr. Prabhu Desai, anything from your side?
Yeah, he was asking regarding the cystoid edema. Obviously, we won't be in a hurry to treat that, because if the basic pathology was the ERM, we would definitely wait. And in his own experience, he has seen that it may take at times years together to have that anatomy getting better. Yes, but in case if he's sort of a one-eyed patient and you want faster recovery, sometimes I consider giving an IVTA after a 2 to 3 months observation. If the edema persists on the OCT, then I may consider giving him IVTA so as to clear up the remaining cystoid changes.
Okay. Thank you. So I think we'll move ahead.
Can I just make a quick point?
Yeah. Manish, please go ahead. Sorry, I missed you. Please go ahead.
Yeah. I think it's very important to, especially if you're dealing with a thick ERM, I think it's very important to counsel the patient about delayed visual recovery over a period of time, because they expect quick recovery. Everybody has said it's a pretty easy surgery and all. So I think it's important to counsel the patient about delayed visual recovery. And I think it just takes its own time, up to 6 months to a year, and the vision gradually, we've seen it improve and retina fall back in its place.
Yes, and other point, as Swapnesh has mentioned, is don't miss the periphery, because you are doing a simple surgery. You'll end up with breaks. If you miss them, you end up with more problems, as even Dr. Vatsal has shown in some of his cases. So I think always if you are concentrated on the central part, don't miss the periphery. That's very important. I think we can go with the next presentation.
Yeah. So the next presentation is, I would like to invite my dear friend, Dr. Nivian Madhivanan, all the way from Chennai. And his name is not only Nivian Madhivanan, he is Nivian Madhivanan Einstein. Nivian is always looking at new ways to do old techniques. He's always looking at innovating instruments, and he always has fresh thoughts with him. And keeping that in mind, his topic for today is CM T-Flex IOL, a new option for aphakia. So welcome, Nivian, and please, the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Thank you, Preetham, for those kind words. Actually, put me under pressure before my presentation. So, respected teachers, senior ophthalmologists, my dear friends. So, is my screen visible?
Yes, Nivian.
So, I'm going to talk about the new CM T-Flex IOL, a new option for aphakia. So, as you all know, like every innovation comes with the question why, and so did mine. So for more than 20 years, I think we've been doing scleral fixated IOL, starting from the suture technique, and then Chariot revolutionized it by externalizing the haptic. And there were many modifications of those techniques from there on. Then we had the glued IOL technique where you put the glues for the flap. Then the X-Nick technique from Aravind, where they externalized the haptic through the needles. And then now the MNA technique where they used to cauterize the end. And so these are all modifications of the existing techniques. So that's why I thought, why not a new option or a new IOL that is fit for these aphakic patients? So there came the CM T-Flex. As you can see, it's a single piece hydrophilic lens with a specialized T-shaped haptic. So these T-shaped haptic, when brought out of the sclerostomies, open up and prevent it from falling back. So there will not be any tucking or suturing. So let us go through some of the case scenarios. So this is a sclerophakia case with a 360-degree subluxated lens. As we all know, for every secondary IOL, the 0-180-degree marking is very crucial because it prevents the for the stability of the lens and also for the rotation of the lens causing any astigmatism. So 2 by 2.5 scleral partial thickness flaps are actually fashioned using a crescent knife on either side. So once that is done, 1.5 millimeters away from the limbus, a 23 gauge sclerostomy is made. So here we have the lens also to deal with. So what I did is use the same needle to pierce into the substance of the lens to prevent it from falling back. So as we are surgeons, we know once it goes back, it's a totally new ball game. And this helped because it was relatively a soft cataract. So after a limited vitrectomy, I made a puncture through the posterior plate, and then with the combination of aspiration and cutting, the entire lensectomy could be performed easily. As you can see, this was a very soft nucleus. Care was just taken so we don't drop any of the fragments below. And then after a vitrectomy, so this is the CM T-Flex IOL. As you can see, the specialized T-shaped haptics. The loading is like any other normal foldable lens in any cartridge, which goes through a 2.8 millimeter incision. So it can go through a clear corneal incision and making sure the T haptic comes out first. So you can, using the Pranav forceps, you can see there this broad tooth forceps so that it doesn't chip away the lens material. You can use to grasp the head of it or even the neck of it. But at this time, we don't actually pull the lens because it can detach it from the optic. So we inject the rest of the lens slowly, and we can leave the trailing haptic at the wound or sometimes with the pupil small over the iris also. And then gently it is brought out of the sclerostomy. As you can see, it actually pops out, the pop, and the T opens up. And then that is it for the one side. You can see the T junctions outside. Yeah. So this is just a small animation video clip to show how the lens is injected, and grasping the T head on is the best. Actually, you can hold the neck also, and then gently brought out, and through sclera it opens up, and these specialized haptics actually prevent it from falling back. So for the second haptic, we use the handshake technique. So here again, we have different forceps called the Nishi grasping forceps, which has serrations, so that it gives you a good hold without causing any damage to the lens. And then grasping the other head, it is gently brought outside. So once both the T-Flex haptics are outside, you can see that is almost the end of the surgery. These lenses having large optics are always well centered, and the centration doesn't depend on the amount of haptics that you tuck, and the trocars are removed. And we usually use glue, but you can also use sutures or even with that. We have been having almost more than 2 years follow-up. Actually, this came out 2 years back, but thanks to COVID, it took some time for the patency and for the lens manufacturing to come out. So these were the immediate post day one pictures and some of the 1 month pictures. And we've also been doing studies on UBM to see the position of the lens, because we have some angulation between the haptic and the optic. So that prevents the rubbing of these haptics to any pigment release or any glaucoma effects. And also doing some OCT over the flaps to see how in long term, whether there's going to be any exposure of these flaps that are kept outside. We do have some local and international publications that have come out. Moving on to some of, then we started taking it for more of the challenging cases. So this was one more of a case, a young person who was a traumatic aphakia for a long time with glaucoma. So he was planned for a combined surgery at TRAB with a secondary IOL implantation. So the glaucoma surgeon actually performed the TRAB superiorly. So mitomycin C was used. And then after that, we took over, and then the flaps were made. As for any secondary IOL, one of the major key is to make sure that you remove all the vitreous. And I always prefer to stain it with tricot, but when you can see the vitreous so clearly. So good vitrectomy is a key for any secondary IOL procedure. So this is the Nishi grasping process with crisscross serrations, which actually helps to hold the forceps. And this is the Pranav forceps. It's just a broad tooth in the center. So the other forces, sometimes if it is sharp, it can actually bite into this hydrophilic material. So here again, going through the clear corneal incision, the lens is injected, making sure the T comes out first. So it actually makes it easier, and then make sure you get a good hold of it before injecting the rest of the lens. Once the rest of the lens is injected, then we gently bring it out of the sclerostomy. So once you see that the T again opens up, and then using the handshake technique, the other side is exchanged to the other forceps. And these being these hydrophilic material actually is forgiving, so it's less traumatic to the ocular tissue and actually flexes, causing less intraocular damage also. But here in this case, we had the second thing to deal is we had the Sommering ring also. So after that, gently we had to make sure that the thing was dialed into the anterior chamber. So sometimes it is difficult just to aspirate these remnants of the nucleus. So using the T-flex as a scaffold, the Sommering ring was brought into the anterior chamber, and using very low parameters, it was phacoemulsified, making sure we don't lose any of the fragments behind. And then any of the synechiae that was there that was released, that is where the pupil actually looks irregular, the few attachments superiorly. So once that was released, you had a nice round oval, round pupil, and you can see the PI there. So this was almost the end of the surgery. And the patient is really doing well, the good, nice filtering blood. But you can see the traumatic old scar in the cornea and well-centered IOL. So in this shortage of time, we just wanted to answer the question that it can be done without the trocar also. In some cases, we all know the most common thing is the hypotony, that is this thing. So either you can use the trocar or we can use the AC maintainer, or in some cases, we can actually do it even without that as long as the eyeball is formed. So this was one of the such cases where we did not use the trocars. But in the end, we had to make sure there was no vitreous that was remaining and it was stained with tricot. Complications are there as we have any secondary IOL procedures. The haptics can break if you have excess pull or more force. So there is a short learning curve. It can slip through the other side when you try to pull too hard, or when we have large eyeballs. So that has been one of the things. We haven't had any late dislocations as such, unless there's been a physical damage to the lens or any arthritis or glaucoma in our short experience with almost 30 IOLs now. And we haven't had any exposure to the sclera. So once again, thank the entire MOS team, and like to have a special thanks for Sapnesh and Preetham. It's always been a great pleasure to be a part of this MOS, and always looking forward for this wonderful experience, and always inspired and learning from Manish sir's surgical videos. Thank
Always
you.
a pleasure to have you, Niven. So any comments, Sapnesh?
No, wonderful technique, and I think it's a great adaptation and great innovation from Nivian as usual. And we would be looking for Nivian, for everybody would be interested in what is the make of this IOL, what is the cost, and how can we get a hold of it within Bombay? Who is the distributor?
The Appasamy, we have Appasamy who's actually manufacturing these lenses. So, and from this year onwards, it's currently available in the market. They priced it at, I think it is around 1,500 rupees. But I think I can promise the entire panelist here, I'll make sure you all get a supply of these lenses free of cost from Chennai. So it'll be great if you could all use it and then give me your feedbacks. So more of negative feedbacks to actually know whether it is actually easy to use and is it going to be an alternative. So that will be very useful and helpful.
What if you had created that T-junction a bit longer? Would it have mattered?
The overall diameter is like we have kept it as 14. So it's a good question.
No. I'm telling about the part of the IOL which juts out.
Okay.
If that is longer, then it gives a pseudo confidence or actual confidence to the surgeon that it won't slip back inside.
Yeah, it doesn't slip back inside, but then it'll be hanging, no? Like sometimes like the Emani technique where you really don't know how much of the lens is actually hanging back. So that is one thing that we wanted to prevent actually.
Okay, great. Super. So And the A constant, if you know.
We have the standard is 118.0.
Okay. Optical biometer.
Yes.
So,
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nivian.
Thank you.
Shall we proceed to the next one?
Yes, please. I think we can.
Oh yes. So we have Dr. Mandar Jonglekar. Is he ready with his presentation, Mandar? Mandar?
Hello. Yeah.
Yeah.
It will take some time. I have some connectivity issues.
Okay.
Can
Okay.
you take with
problem.
next
probably
one?
then we'll go to Ashwin. Ashwin, you're ready? Ashwin, are you ready with your presentation on diabetes, diabetic weight? Or we proceed to Shamik then. Is Shamik around? Maybe I'll just try and call Ashwin and see if he's.
Yeah, sure.
Meanwhile, a quick question. We'll just save time. While doing ERM with ILM peeling, sometimes one stalk of the ERM is very deeply incarcerated. Sometimes does happen. You can't remove it totally. Do you trim around it, leave it back, or you really go for a full-fledged removal of that? If one of the end of the ERM is deeply incarcerated retina, how do you go?
If it is away from the foveal area, I just leave it and trim it all around. But if it is bang on the fovea, then as written in many of the literature also, that it is ILM flap. It's like an inverted flap technique, somewhat like an inverted flap technique that we do, and we hope for the best because we don't want to cause iatrogenic macular hole at any cost.
I think Ashwin is ready.
Okay.
I am ready. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen, Ashwin. So Ashwin Bafna is again a very astute clinician and a prolific surgeon, vitreoretinal surgeon from Mumbai. He's an alumnus of the Arvind Eye Hospital. Ashwin, go ahead. You're going to present on principles of diabetic vitrectomy. Go ahead.
Ashwin, turn your video off so that the streaming is smoother.
Yeah, turn your video off. You'll get a better bandwidth. Ashwin, turn your video off and you're muted.
Now can you see me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Now share your screen and keep your video off.
Yeah, you can see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay. At the outset, I would like to thank Preetham and Swapnesh for this opportunity. My topic today will be principles of diabetic retinopathy. And I would also like to thank the MOS faculty, the organizers for this opportunity. So I just kept this talk very simple and short. I've tried to explain things which make these difficult surgeries easier to some extent. Opinions shared here are solely mine, and I'm open to suggestions by all. This presentation includes relevant steps, but there may be many more. And those who wish to contact me, I have an email ID, and this is how I look, so that if you see me sometime, you can always pop up a question. So all of us are aware about the indications of vitrectomy, which are evolving in this era of vitrectomy. I'll not go into details of that and jump to the topic. So history taking in any surgical case is so important. It gives you a lot of pointers, like what is the requirement of the patient. And remember that we all are working for the patient benefit. So it is important that we hear out the patient, what are his expectations, and according to that, we can always prognosticate what amount of vision he'll get back, what are his expectations, all that we'll come to. A good clinical examination for any surgery is very important, especially in diabetic vitrectomy. The initial presenting visual acuity is so important that that will tell you what will be the final outcome. And many a times we as retina surgeons always see dilated patients and we forget to check the pupils. So it is very important that we tell our optometrist or whoever sees the patient initially that he should check the pupils, especially when the vision is poor. That will tell you a lot of information about the associated optic nerve pathology or gross retinal pathology which may be present in these patients. And very important factor is doing a B scan. And I call it in these diabetic vitrectomy is a B scan by AI, or what we call as artificial imaging. Because the operating surgeon, when he does the B scan by himself, he can actually visualize how the condition of the vitreous is and its association with the retina, which is very important when he approaches the patient during the surgery. If you have a simple almost incomplete PVD, which is attached to an optic nerve and free from all other sides, you know that it's a relatively simple case and easier to approach. So you always assess the vascular status of the retina and may opt for a pre-operative anti-VEGF depending upon the vascularity, which can be given anytime 3 to 5 days prior to surgery, which is usually what I follow. The first step in the diabetic vitrectomy or in any vitrectomy is rather anterior vitrectomy. It is this little step which makes every vitrectomy journey very great. So don't rush into it and just give it some time, because I've seen many times that people just put in their trocar cannula, they put in their cutter, light pipe and just start. You have to just put in their biome and just start doing vitrectomy. But you give adequate time to anterior vitrectomy, it will avoid a lot of complications. Remember, vitreous is a mass of collagen. You have to first cut the anterior vitreous, then go into the core. It's not like you do the core first and the anterior vitreous will come on its own. Never. And many a time during anterior vitrectomy, you will see the V's ring coming in case of RD or the blood coming in case of diabetic vitrectomy. So it is a very important step. We should not rush into this step. A good core vitrectomy will give you an easy access to the membranes which are about to be. So you have to remove the core vitreous above the membranes first to approach the membrane. So that also is a very important step in a diabetic vitrectomy. So you got every surgeon goes down a lot of wrong doors till he finds the right one, is what I call this step. And most often my fellows or colleagues ask me, where do you open the posterior hyaloid phase? So there is no correct rule for that, but still you can have some set of rules which you can follow. You are actually supposed to open the posterior hyaloid where it is elevated maximum. So usually for a right eye and left eye have a different approach. In the right eye, suppose if this is the hyaloid which is present at the posterior pole, and the right hand is where I hold my cutter because I'm a right hand surgeon, and left hand is where I hold my light pipe. So I usually start in the right eye in the superior temporal quadrant because that is the easiest accessible area for me. And that's where I try to open the hyaloid if possible, if it is elevated maximum there. Similarly, in the left eye, I open it in the superior nasal quadrant. After doing this, so here you can see in a video that I am doing my core vitrectomy. And then I go to the nasal aspect. This is a left eye, so I go to the superior nasal aspect where I give my suction and cutting at the same time. You have to be very patient. The vitreous will come with your suction of the cutter. So be patient. Once the vitreous posterior hyaloid is phased, you will see that the blood actually gets down into the cutter. So once you have opened the hyaloid, you always try to peel from above downwards because that is the easiest way. You will actually see the attachments. When you start peeling from above downwards, you will start seeing the attachments of the vitreous to the retina, and that will make your job much easier. Rather than you peeling from downwards upwards, it becomes very difficult. And always let the hyaloid act as a third hand. That's what I would call. Don't keep cutting all around the membranes. So that's the wrong way. All of us know that the posterior membranes are attached to the anterior part by a lot of vitreous fibrils. So you just don't start cutting them all around. Rather than that, if you want, you can cut it in the area of the membrane and leave the rest of the hyaloid so that hyaloid acts as a traction to pull your membrane up. And that gives you a plane to dissect it. So in this video, I'm just trying to show that I've opened the hyaloid in the superior part. And then I'm gradually peeling the membrane using the suction and the cutter simultaneously. So gradually you can start peeling from above downwards. And I'm not cutting the vitreous here in the inferior quadrant, if you see. I'm not cutting the vitreous at all here. So here I'm trying to release. This membrane has an attachment temporal to the macula. One is on the disc. And the third, which I noticed later on, was in the nasal periphery. So I then start seeing the membrane. I start trying, once I feel from the temporal part, I start pulling it up from the disc. But when I see that there's a lot of traction towards the nasal side, I go on to the nasal aspect and try to pull it up. And then when it is free from the nasal aspect, the entire membrane actually comes off very easily. And then lastly, on the disc, I just trim it off over the disc and release the entire membrane in toto. So this is one technique which I call as the OTT peeling, where I keep the cutter on top of the membrane. I apply the suction and the cutter. The part of the membrane, when it's free, it gets into the cutter and it's taken away by the cutter. This is called as the over the top peeling of the membrane. So this video will actually demonstrate how I do that. Is when I make an opening over the disc, because that's where there was a blood behind the membrane, and that was where the hyaloid was most elevated. So here I made the opening here into the posterior hyaloid phase with my cutter. Then I use a forceps to gently lift it up and then extend this opening. Then I just use a forceps, just lift it up from the disc and just extend the opening. And then I just use my cutter to aspirate the blood so that I get a better view of the underlying retina and the macula. So using the cutter even aspirates the blood, and that's how I get a better view. So here, as I start cutting, the blood comes out and the membrane gets into my cutter. And what I'm doing now is that I'm staying on the membrane. I'm not going on the other side of the membrane. I'm staying on the membrane, and gently, as I'm cutting, as I'm using my suction, the membrane peels off on its own. So that's how. Though it makes the job easy, and it actually makes it safe also, because you don't have retina coming into your cutter. And the retina is always away. Suction actually causes lot of less traction onto the retina and prevents breaks. And it maintains the plane of dissection. And keep your options open. So when you see the patient here, you can see that I'm sitting temporally. This is the left eye of the patient. I'm sitting temporally on purpose, because when I went, I had noticed that the hyaloid was elevated in the superotemporal quadrant. In the left eye, it would be very difficult for me to approach. So I approach this patient from temporally, and you can see that the hyaloid there is elevated, and you can see that shadow there, which tells you that the hyaloid is, the membrane is elevated. Now I just lift it up with my cutter. Then I think I wanted to do a bimanual dissection because it was a very thick, densely attached membrane to the retina. So I put in a chandelier on the opposite side, and I use a cutter and the forceps to peel this membrane. So gradually I negotiate my way. I hold the membrane with the forceps to keep it up, and then it gradually I tend to I go in, and thankfully I had no retinotomies in this case, but a lot of bleeding. So I'd put in oil at the end of the this thing, and after oil removal, this patient had some 624 useful vision, and he was a one-eyed patient. Here again, you can see the over the top peeling of the membrane, where you can see I will put the cutter just next to the cut edge of the membrane, and the membrane will get into the cutter there. Now you will see it. So it peels off very easily if you apply suction. Be patient, be on the membrane there. The membrane just peels off on its own. You don't have to use any forceps or anything. This is a very, very useful step if you use properly. And here I could see the attachment of the membrane to the retina. So I gently dissect it with the cutter there. So you address the bleeders at the end of the surgery. Usually use the cautery. Whenever you see the bleeder, it keeps your field clear. Use lower power, because remember, in diabetic vitrectomy, the retina is ischemic. It may create breaks at high power. Never use the cautery on the optic nerve head, because it may damage the nerve fibers. Whenever you have breaks in diabetic vitrectomy, you ensure complete removal of membrane. Otherwise, it will cause redetachment. So you examine the macula and decide whether you have to peel the ILM or the ERM needs to be removed. Because the next speaker is going to speak about it, I'm not going to go ahead. So examine the periphery for any residual breaks or fibrovascular proliferation. A good endolaser beyond the equator is must in these cases. And you assess whether you need any kind of tamponade to stop the bleeding, or if you have breaks, you may need to use tamponades. So in summary, good assessment before the surgery, plan the case. Anterior vitrectomy is very important step. Open the posterior hyaloid, identify the correct plane, because it reduces the bleeding and makes the surgery more easy. Always peel from above downwards. Minimal pull on the membranes to avoid a break, and use adjuncts when needed, like triamcinolone, BBG, cautery, chandelier, or tamponade. So our greatest glory is not in never falling, but it's rising every time we fall. So you should attempt these cases, because once you attempt, slowly you'll start building up your confidence, and you'll attempt more of these cases. Rather than getting afraid of the complications, attempt these cases, because these patients have nowhere to go. Thank you.
Ashwin, that's a good presentation.
Thank
Any
you.
questions for Ashwin? I think if there are no many questions, I think we can go to the next speaker. Dr. Shamik Ambadkar, is he there? Ready? Dr. Shamik?
We can take Dr. Mandar Joglekar.
Yeah, maybe. Yes, can I share?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So, yeah. So my talk is on the slide is visible. The slides are visible or not?
Yes, Mandar,
Yeah,
go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah.
please.
Audible.
The Yamana's intrascleral fixation double needle technique tips and tricks is the topic. I thank the MOS and organizing committee and secretary for giving me this opportunity. So yeah, Yamana technique is a glueless and sutureless modification of the intrascleral fixation techniques, which was originally given by Gabor and propagated by Agarwal, who popularized it, Dr. Agarwal. The most important tip is a complete vitrectomy and removal of capsular tissues. Because if you don't remove the vitreous, your haptics and needles are going to entangle in that, and you are going to have a problem. So this is the most important tip and trick. So there are the salient features of this technique. One is the threading of the haptic. You insert the needle, you thread the leading haptic in the one bore, then you insert another needle from the opposite side 180 degree apart. Then the trailing haptic is threaded inside. Then both are externalized, and a flange is created by applying the heat. This is the basic technique of the Yamana's intrascleral fixation technique. Then this haptics are pushed inside, and the flange is impacted in the scleral openings so that it doesn't move and it will remain stable. So this is a small surgical video of the technique. So the needle is, markings are made first. I will talk about that later in the tips. So first, the lens is delivered. Use a retrotonal forceps. Use a retrotonal forceps to grab it and thread it inside. Put another needle 180 degree apart or bring it to the pupillary area. Then use retrotonal forceps to grab it and thread it inside the needle. Once you have threaded an optimal length, both are externalized simultaneously. And then flange is created by applying heat, cautery. And then they are pushed inside. Then you get a well-centered. This is the same. So how you graduate from the other surgeries to this surgery and make this surgery a successful surgery? So basic, these are a few pointers that I can give. Just firstly, you have to practice before the surgery, then mark the axis and orientation to the wound is important. And I always stress on using 2 needles at a time, and try not to touch the cautery to the flange. So this is what we do. We try to practice beforehand to get a feeling how which lens you are going to use and which needle you are going to use and how you are going to thread it. So you get a grip how it feels. Then markings are very important because that's how we are going to introduce it. So first you have to mark 180 degree axis by some toric marker, which should be perpendicular to the roughly perpendicular to the rhexis, to the wound. The second marking is introduced 2 millimeters from the limbus, from the first mark, and another is 2 millimeters to the clockwise direction on the both sides. This should have an angle of 10 to 15 degrees to accommodate the haptic orientation. Because this angulation is 5 degree, it should be around 5 degree inside, curved inside, so that it accommodates this angle. So the correct holding position is important. Sorry, just a minute. So this is we are holding it too far away. Set. So if you hold it too close to the haptic, it won't thread. You have to hold it at the correct position. It's not threading now, it has gone out. And then we have to hold it slightly away so that it threads inside. This issue arises mostly with the trailing haptic, because leading haptic is usually easy to thread. Then flange correction is an important thing, because when you create a flange, you have to take very important step is not to touch the haptic with this your heat, because once you once you touch the haptic, it forms a kind of disc and not a conical structure. You can see this conical structure is forming, which is very important to form, so that it goes inside and gets stuck into the scleral wound. It prevents the flippage and externalization of the haptics in the post-operative period. You can see it again. The heat cautery is applied from a distance so that it forms a nicely conical flange. So why 2 needles? So when you move one needle, if you just do one needle and move it outside, the other haptic comes to this position. From this position, it is very difficult to thread it, because needle is going to come from this side and it is going to be a very difficult problem to thread it inside, and this will cause twisting at this angle and this angle, and may damage the lens in this process. So what may be the problems with the 2 needles is that one of the is that slippage of opposite haptic in the vitreous that can happen in the beginning stages. To prevent that, you can hold the one haptic, you can externalize one haptic and hold the other haptic with a inside the either the don't external take away the needle, or hold it with your assistant holds it with the needle, or you can use some silicone tips to hold it. Use 27 gauge, not 26 gauge, because 27 gauge is readily available here, and 26 gauge gives a bigger opening, and 27 gauge is very easily available, and it's easily threadable. And keep one. So when you get a smaller pupil, you don't have to worry, because initial threading is always easy. The problem arises when when you thread the trailing haptic, but you have to use your needle to stretch the pupil, and that's it. You can just thread it without any issues. Sometimes okay, I think just the last one. Sometimes this IOL will flip because of my hand touch in early phases. This has flipped. I just rotated it and it came in at the place, and then I can just go inside and thread it inside and complete the surgery. So very important is not to panic, think of the situation and do the needful. Thank you.
Excellent videos, Mandar, as usual.
Yeah.
Which is the common preferred lens you use, Mandar?
I use Sensar or Technis 3-piece.
There is less flippage in those lenses?
Yeah. because the angulations, the other option is accuracy, which is but their haptic is slightly bent. So
Okay.
the tip is slightly bent, so I find it more easy in toughness and sensor. No financial interest actually.
Okay. No problem.
But Mandar, suppose if you inadvertently, if you authorize a tip of the haptic,
Yeah.
then is there any way to bail yourself out, or you just have to use another IOL then?
You can cut it and actually reflange it,
Okay.
but you have to do it on the both ends.
Yeah.
Same
okay.
thing.
So they're equal. Okay.
Equal length. So that I think you can do it once. That's your opportunity.
Right. Any other questions for Mandar, or we'll move on to the next one? Shamik. Shamik is there? I'm not seeing Shamik for the last presentation. I think if Shamik is not going to be there, I think we'll conclude the session. Sachin, any last words before we conclude? Nitin sir, shall we conclude?
I think we should conclude. The talks were excellent. We had a good discussion. I think we got the take-home points quite well.
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.